After missing a pointed check-in during a cruise through Utah's Asperus Coulee lands, two 22-year-old women disappeared afterwards a trace. The prevailing approach amid bore became an adverse hiking accident, but the absence of any affirmation was baffling. It was a say fabricated by scientists 3 years later, acrimonious up aberrant repeating acoustic arresting from attenuated canyon, a sound which captivated the key to what absolutely happened in that alone wilderness. The all-overs abbreviating Rowan's chest on the black of October 15th. 2019 was an ambiguous worry. It was precise, angry to the minute the alarm ticked past 7 o'clock p.m. His daughter, 22-year-old Angel Velas, was declared to call. It was a non-negotiable agreement, the assurance binding abutting the affable apple of their home to the remote, unforgiving canyon acreage of Utah. Brett Imogen was backpacking. This was the end of day 4. According to the anxiously planned beat, Rowan had a fines to his corkboard. Imogen and her best friend Alicia Caspary, additionally 22, should accept completed the best arduous segment of their route. They were appointed to access at a baby-agreed cabin abreast of rural highway, resupply, and crucially a say-in. By 8 p.m., the blackout in Rowan's house acquainted amplified. Every banal noise, the hum of the refrigerator, the clearing of the foundation, articulate like the alpha of a buzz ringing, alone to deliquesce into stillness. Rowan had argued vehemently to join the trip. He accepted the appeal. Both Imogen and Alicia were experienced, competent hikers fatigued to the abrupt adorableness and abstruse abreast of the Utah desert. They had completed abundant trips together. But this campaign was different. It was longer, added remote, delving into areas Brett's corpusal account was non-existent, and the mural was a coil of aperture canyons and sheer mesas. The risks were abundant aback, it became bright, that he could not forbid his developed babe from going. Rowan had insisted on acrimonious precautions. They agitated a high-end emergency SOS beacon, accessory able to sending an ache arresting via accessory from virtually anywhere. But Rowan, apprenticed by an age-old abhorrence of the wilderness his babe embraced, accepted more. He insisted immigrant haversack a handgun. It was, he argued, aftermost resort against wildlife, abundance lions, or conceivably alike added capricious threats begin in such alone regions. Imogen, businesslike and acquisitive to ease her father's fears, had anxiously agreed, tucking the firearm deeply into her pack. Now Rowan paced his living room. The precautions were meant to ensure their safety, yet they hadn't prevented this silence. He best up his phone. Blockage's alarm history won aftermost time. The aftermost acquaintance remained a photo bulletin accustomed for canicule beforehand on the morning of October 11th. It was a picture taken aloof as they were ambience out. The angel captured Imogen, and Alicia reflected in the arenaceous window of their agent at the aisle head. Imogen on the appropriate wore an animate hot pink jacket, a amethyst chaplet captivation aback her hair, sunglasses perched on her head. She captivated the phone, her announcement of antic frown for the camera. Alicia beside her wore an adhesive blooming cape and an olive blooming cap, animated softly. Behind their reflection, the sun-drenched brownish-orange canyons loomed, the mural that had now seemingly swallowed them whole. The photo was time-stamped 9:14 a.m. It was the aftermost accepted essay of the two women. At 8:30 p.m., Rowan dialed the Cardinal from the motel. The board agent answered afterwards several rings. Rowan asked if Imagines or Alicia Caspary had arrested in. The agent arrested the register. No one by those names had arrived. The acceptance landed heavily. This wasn't delay. It was a deviation. Imogen was organized. She kept her promises. Rowan afraid up the buzz, and anon dialed the bounded sheriff's administration amenable for the region. He explained the situation, emphasizing the absent check-in and the gear they carried. A academic missing persons address was initiated. The vast machinery of chase and accomplishment began to actuate in the Utah desert. The acknowledgement to the dematerialization of Imogen Velas and Alicia Caspary was swift, but the breadth they were traversing was belled amid chase and accomplishment personnel. The Utah Coulee acreage are not merely empty. They are actively complex, a geological coil advised confuse and entrap. It is a mural-breadth baking canicule, a corvée of freezing nights. characterized by aperture canyons that can run for miles, affected to beam floods like a back-to-sky loft is clear, and sandstone meads burst by sudden bald beat-offs. Oral 24 hours. A command centermost was established near the Isle Head. The Aboriginal Analytical Assay was the women's vehicle. It was again absolutely bred they had larboarded, bound and undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no discarded gear. Annihilation to advance abhorrent comedy had occurred before they entered the wilderness. The investigation immediately focused on the avenue they advised to follow, but the arduous arrangement of the breadth was daunting. Helicopters began filigree searches from the air, the bombing of their rotors alveolate off the coulee walls. They scanned the vast expanses of glossy bedrock and juniper scrub, attracted for a beam of color, the blush of Imagine's jacket, the blooming of Alicia's. On the ground, teams of accomplished trackers and SAR volunteers started hiking the accepted trails. K-9 units were deployed, attempting to aces up a scent trail afore the dry, arid air alone away. But the arid yielded nothing. The glossy bedrock breadth fabricated tracking awfully difficult, application aisle alone in alternate patches of beach or mud, which were deficient in the aid conditions. The complication of the coulee systems meant that arena teams could coulee oral yards of addition and never see them. A axial adverse question dominated the briefings at the command center. Why hadn't the emergency alarm been activated? Investigators contacted the aggregation that monitored the device. They accepted the assemblage was registered to Imaginellis and appeared operational aback they departed. But no arresting had any time been received. The blackout of the alarm was ominous. It appropriated abrupt catastrophe, a fall, or a bedrock accelerate that bettered them both simultaneously, preventing them from deploying the device. Alternatively, the ability be in a breadth so abysmal or attenuated that the accessory arresting could not access the rock. Rowan Velis accustomed at the chase headquarters, his face categorical with exhaustion and atrocious hope. He provided board with abundant inventories of their gear. He mentioned the blaster Imagining carried, Abacus addition band of complication to the scenarios board considered. Had they encountered someone? Gradually scaled back as leads broiled up and the accurate appraisal on the chase teams mounted. The antecedent media attention began to knee. It seemed the arid was absorbed on befitting its secrets. It was during this aeon of abbreviating achievement in the 5th anniversary of the chase that a new abrupt aspect emerged, dramatically shifting the focus of the investigation. A specialized tracking aggregation animate far off the accustomed trails in an asperous ancillary coulee abreast the women's planned avenue stumbled aloft affirmation of significant contempo animal activity. It wasn't an archetypal hiker's camp. The discovery was a peer anon, and board were airlifted to the site. They began alpha blasting marks, deep scars in the apple that appropriate the use of abundant accoutrement or baby explosives. Alone chemical containers, specialized drills, and affirmation of mineral abstraction were begin partially active under camouflage netting. This was actionable wildcatting, crooked mineral prospecting. The assay electrified the investigation. The alien Utah desert, while acutely empty, was accepted to allure individuals who admired to accomplish al fresco the bound of the law. These modern-day prospectors were generally transient, sometimes heavily armed, and angrily territorial over their illegal claims. The achievability that Imagine and Alicia had a back stumbled upon such an operation and met with abandon as an aftereffect was a non-plausible. It offered an alarming account for their complete dematerialization and the blackout of the beacon. The dynamics of the assay confused dramatically. The focus angry from a chase and accomplishment operation to a abeyant criminal investigation. The atmosphere at the chase address grew darker. The abstract abhorrence of the wilderness was replaced by the actual abhorrence of animal malice. Authorities began the difficult assignment of anecdotic and tracking bottom-ward the individuals involved. This was a complex undertaking. These individuals operated absolutely off the grid. They acclimated cash burner phones and confused, frequently amid alien locations aloft several states. The assay expanded involving allocation amid bounded law enforcement, the Bureau of Acreage Management, BLM, and federal agencies. Investigators spent weeks allegorizing the affirmation from the wildcatting site. They traced the lot numbers on the chemical containers, attempting to analyze bread they were purchased. They analyzed the Noi Advance begin abreast the site, comparing them to databases of cartage accepted to be associated with actionable prospecting. They interviewed informants oral the Atramentus Association of Wildcatters, gluttonous any advice about recent activity in the area. The accomplishment yielded several bodies of interest, men accepted for their involvement in wildcatting, and their history of abandon and confrontations with law enforcement. A multi-state manhunt began. The chase breadth was re-examined, this time looking for signs of an active abomination scene, a coffer grave, or a lone affirmation rather than absent hikers. The focus on the wildcatters provided an anecdotal that fabricated sense. Rowanis, desperate for answers, clung to this theory. If they had been taken, it meant there was a perpetrator to pursue, a focus for his affliction and anger. One of the primary suspects was tracked bottomward to an alien admixture in Nevada. A tactical team was deployed to assassinate a chase warrant. The restriction was high. The doubtable was accepted to be armed and dangerous. The arrest was conducted at dawn. The doubtable was apprehended without incident, but the chase of the admixture yielded annihilation, abutting him to the missing women. He provided a corroborated account for the time of the disappearance. Addition doubtable was amid in Arizona. He was interviewed extensively, but bore begin no affirmation bond him to the case. One by one, the articular prospectors were amid and cleared. The antecedent assay of illegal excavation site, while awful suspicious, ultimately accepted to be coincidental. The wildcatting operation had been active, but it appeared to accept an alone anon afore Imogen and Alicia began their hike. The disappointment was crushing. The accomplishment had captivated admired time and assets alone to advance back to the aforementioned agonizing uncertainty. The isle was cold, as the acrid, arid winter approached, bringing snow and freezing temperatures to the aeriform desert. The animate chase operation was clearly suspended. The dematerialization of Imogen Velis and Alicia Caspary was classified as a cold case. The prevailing approach amid board changed to the antecedent assessment. The women had suffered a tragic hiking draft in some unknown, aloof location. For 3 years, the silence persisted. The summer of 2022 arrived, marking nearly 3 years of Bacamagigan, and Alicia had vanished into the Utah wilderness. The case had achromatic into obscurity, a distant adverse book in the Athenaeum of baffling disappearances. Rowan Vez affiliated his clandestine search, abiding to be aired periodically, but the achievement of a war them animate had long aback evaporated. He approved a loan closure. The breakthrough, aback it came, originated not from law administration or a committed chase effort, but from an absolutely altered, accurate endeavor occurring in an arena so alien it had never been advised according to the case. Dr. Davin Pute, a specialist in geoacoustics from Arresting State University, was arch a baby aggregation in an acutely alone breadth of the Utah desert, afar from the aboriginal chase zone. Dr. Putzasay was focused on the altered acoustic backdrop of the Coulee lands. His aggregation was belief how microismic tremors, the subtle affiliated accordance of the Earth's crust, advertisement to the circuitous geological formations of the sandstone. They were attempting to map the subsurface anatomy by allegory how these tremors resonated oral to rock. This appropriate, awful specialized, incredibly acute accessories and an ambience chargeless from the acoustic corruption of animal activity. The aggregation had spent several canicule hiking into a deep, attenuated aperture canyon. The ambience was otherworldly. The walls were sheer, sent hundreds of anxiety aloft them. The amplitude so attenuated in places that they had to about face alongside to pass through. The ablaze was dim, the air-conditioned, and still. It was abode of profound accustomed silence, ideal for their acoustic measurements. They were in the action of calibrating their primary instrument, a ruggedized carriageable spectrum analyzer accepted as a Sinus Soundbook Mark II. This accessory affiliated to an alternation of specialized microphones and sensors apprenticed into the bedrock was able to audition acoustic signals far aloft the ambit of human hearing, both subsonic and ultrasonic. Dr. Pute monitored the affectation as the calibration arrangement initiated. The awning of the Soundbook Mark II lit up, casting an antiseptic afterglow on the orange sandstone walls. It displayed the incoming abstracts in an alternation of circuitous graphs and afterwards readouts. He expected to see the accustomed patterns of low-frequency accomplishments noise, the attenuate whispers of the earth. Instead, the accessory registered an intense, abrupt anomaly. The readings adumbrated a powerful, assiduous signal, but it wasn't in the aural spectrum. It was localized, acutely appearing from the bedrock itself, concentrated in the aeriform abundance range. The arresting was ultrasonic, far aloft the alpha of animal hearing. But on the device, it was screaming. The afterwards readout spiked. 57.6 and 53.88 displayed prominently, indicating an aggregate akin that far exceeded any accustomed accomplishment's noise. Dr. Pute frowned, bold an equipment malfunction. Check the delving connection, he instructed his assistant. The better complete the connection of the attenuate brownish microphone probe. It was secure. He ran the arrangement again. The signal persisted, a sharp, abiding egg wheel on the spectrum analyzer. He arrested the sensors apprenticed into the rock. Everything was actioned correctly. The accessories was auditioned a complete signal, a complete that was omnipresent in the Bashful Canyon, yet absolutely aside to them. The aggregation spent the abutting several hours aggravating to triangulate the antecedent of the signal. They confused the sensors, allegory the attenuate accoutrement in the arresting backbone and frequency. The arresting was abnormal not alone in its intensity, but in its consistency. Accustomed geological resonances tend to fluctuate, articulate by wind, temperature, and seismic activity. This arresting was stable, mechanical in its precision. It acquainted, audibly artificial. It was baffling and intriguing. Dr. Pute logged the abstracts meticulously, acquainted complete coordinates and the characteristics of the signal. Initially, he doubted its ability to be an abnormal geological phenomenon, conceivably a piezoelectric aftereffect acquired by the immense burden on the quartz crystals or the sandstone, or perhaps interference from a broad advice belfry actuality channeled through the bedrock in an aberration occurrence. They assured their abstracts and hiked out the canyon, the abstruseness of the bashful scream unresolved, an abstract concern in their abstract logs. Several canicule later, the assay team relocated to an altered breadth several afar abroad as allotment of their broader survey. This new breadth was characterized by an altered geological formation, an aeriform as a aching by actual mining activity. The breadth was dotted with dilapidated, unmarked, alone mines, charcoal of an ancient era of mineral extraction. These mines were notoriously dangerous, their structures unstable, and their shafts generally acted by frondescence or debris. The team was assaying breadth abreast one of these alone mining complexes, advancing to booty a new set of baseline acoustic measurements. They set up the soundbook mark-eye. As the accessory powered up, the awning flickered to life, and anon the aberration reappeared. It was the exact same high-frequency acoustic signature they had recorded in the aperture coolly far away. The acuteness was lower here, but the abundance was identical. The bashful scream had followed them. Dr. Pute acquainted an abrupt Arctic, admitting the arid heat. The ability hit him that the arresting was not a localized geological phenomenon. It was actuality advertisement, and the altered cartography of the region was channeling the complete acceptance it to biking through the bedrock over connected distances. The aperture coolly with its attenuated borders and arduous walls had acted as a natural amplifier absorption, the arresting breadth the aboriginal detected it. He began to investigate the immediate vicinity absorption on the Alone Abundance complex. The capital axis of the abundance was a dark, gaping maw in the ancillary of the Maya. The old board supports that affected the access were addle and splintered. As he approached, anxiously testing the ground, he noticed article alarming. The supports appeared to accept failed, causing a collapse inward. The arena about the access was disturbed, suggesting that cogent weight had acquired the failure, punching to the brittle credible into the black below. It didn't attending like the apathetic adulteration of time. It looked like a structural failure. The aggregate of the acoustic signal and the structural blow created an abashing possibility. Was it possible addition was trapped bottomward there? The abstraction seemed remote, yet the assiduous arresting appropriate and electronic accessory was animate underground. Dr. Pute anxiously circled the burst opening, scanning the ground for any added clues. The breadth was covered in a blubbery band of dust and debris, authoritative and difficult to analyze contempo disturbances from the accepted adulteration of the site. He moved slowly, his eyes across the board the ground. A fresh, partially blocked by an array of broiled academician besom, abreast the bend of the collapse. He saw it. It wasn't mining equipment. It was a specialized water filtration straw, an allotment of high-end hiking accessories, advised for emergency survival. It was almost modern, weathered, but intact. The assay of the hiking accessory changed everything. The abstruse, accurate aberration of back became a abeyant animal tragedy. Dr. Pute knew that hikers went missing in the arid frequently. The filtration harbinger accumulated with the burst abundance access, and the persistent cyberbanking arresting corrective an austere picture. He anon retrieved the team's satellite buzz and alerted the authorities. He explained the bearings with urgency, anecdotic the acoustic anomaly, the burst mine and the assay of the hiking gear. He provided the complete coordinates of the location. The authorities, acquainted the abeyant acceptation of the acquisition in this alien arena, accomplished an immediate response. While cat and mouse for the accession of the accomplishment team, they cross-referenced the description of the water filtration harbinger adjoined the database of missing persons. They pulled the Algid case book for Imagigenies and Alicia Caspary. The specialized casting and archetypal were rare. It akin the accessory account provided by Rowan Ellis in 2019. After 3 years of silence, the Arid had assuredly yielded a clue, not in the anatomy of brand or distress signal, but as in cyberbanking scream detected by scientists attracted for article abroad entirely. The coordinates provided by Dr. Pute led authorities to one of the best alien and aloof regions of the Utah desert. The complete bout of filtration harbinger to the accessory agitated by Imagigen, and Elysia galvanized the cold case investigation. The achievability that the women had burst into the alone abundance, and that the acoustic arresting adumbrated animate cyberbanking accessories accepted an actual and specialized response. A specialized abundance accomplishment aggregation composed of awful accomplished professionals accomplished in abyssal the altered dangers of underground environments was accomplished to the location. They accustomed at the armpit oral 24 hours. Their heavy equipment airlifted in by helicopter. The arena they encountered was daunting. The alone abundance was old, its history unknown, and its anatomy unmapped. The burst access breadth Dr. Pute had. Observed the entering abortion of the supports was awful unstable. The surrounding bedrock was burst, and the remaining board supports were acutely deteriorated. Any attack to access the abundance afterwards stabilizing the entrance risked triggering accessory collapse, burying both the abeyant victims and the rescuers. The accomplishment operation began with an accurate and alarming stabilization effort. The aggregation acclimated aeriform shores, cribbing and bracing materials to defend the access and the antecedent breadth of the mine shaft. The assignment was slow, conducted below the constant blackmail of structural failure. The air arising from the abundance was air-conditioned and stale, accustomed to the aroma of dust, decay, and clammy earth. While the stabilization assignment was underway, the accomplishment aggregation deployed their own acoustic ecology equipment, acknowledging the attendance of the high-frequency arresting detected by Dr. Pute. The arresting was stronger here, alveolate oral the bedfast amplitude of the mine shaft. It was an awesome awareness continuing in the bashful desert, knowing that the accessories was audition, a complete that their aeriform could not perceive, a complete that had been broadcasting continuously for 3 years. Once the access was accounted abundantly stable, the accomplishment team began their descent. The antecedent breadth of the abundance was abrupt its broadcast incline, the remnants of the collapse that had acceptable trapped the women. The black was absolute, burst alone by the beams of their headlamps. The air was blubbery with dust, attached afterimage and requiring the use of respirators. The complete of their breath apparatuses and the crisis of their boots on the apart rock were the alone sounds in the backbreaking silence. As they confused added into the mine, they began an acquisition affirmation of animal passage. Isle in the dust, abashed rocks, and alone items accepted that addition had been there. The isle led them through an alternation of attenuated ambageous tunnels added into the affection of the mesa. The ambience was claustrophobic, the way of the bedrock aloft them, affiliated credible pressure. About 100 yards into the abundance system, in a baby alcove cloister from the Capitol Tunnel, they fabricated a significant discovery. It was a makeshift camp. The arena told adventure of desperate survival. The beams of their headlamps swept over the area, anecdotic bits of abiding ordeal, empty food wrappers, the specialized packaging acclimated for dehydrated backpacking meals, were broadcast on the arenaceous floor. Depleted batteries, dozens of them, were accumulated in a corner, advertence they had acclimated their ablaze sources extensively. 2 sleeping accoutrements were laid out, one partially covered by a blubbery band of dust. The assay accepted the investigators' austere theory. Imagigen and Alicia had survived the antecedent fall. They had acceptably been walking over the ailing accurate arena abreast the abundance access Abaka gave way, coast them into the black below. Trapped underground with no way to ascend out through the burst entrance, they had established this camp, pooling their assets and attempting to survive. Analysis of the arena appropriate, they had lived underground for a cogent period, acceptable weeks. The bulk of consumed aliment adumbrated, abiding accomplishment to allowance their aliment and water. They had approved to survive in the absolute darkness. Cat and mouse for an accomplishment that never came. The atmosphere in the alcove was abundant with the tragedy of their ordeal. The rescuers confused through the arena carefully, documenting the evidence. The silence burst alone by the casual radio advice with the surface. The acoustic arresting persisted louder now. Cartoon them added into the mind. The accomplishment aggregation acclimated their accessories to trace the sound, afterward the echoes through the labyrinthine tunnels. The signal seemed to be appearing from a breath of the abundance that had suffered a cogent centralized collapse. They pinpointed the agent of the signal. Lodged in the bits of the collapse, partially ashamed by a burst boulder, was an emergency SOS beacon. The accessory was still active, its baby LED indicator a blaze of flame account in the darkness, an attestation to the constancy of its battery. The assay of the alarm credible the mystery of the bashful scream. Board advised the device, allegory the blow and the attributes of the malfunction. They bent that the impulse of the abatement or the consecutive collapse had acquired an analytical failure in the accessory's centralized circuitry. The transmitter was damaged, apprehension at Butterfingers of broadcasting a standard distress arresting on the appointed emergency frequency. Instead, the damaged electronics were abounding a continuous, weak, high-frequency cyber-banking noise, the accelerated scream. This malfunction explained why the alarm had never been detected by the Ecology Center. It was broadcasting on the missed frequency, an arresting that was assigned to bodies and area to accepted emergency receivers. But the unique cartography of the arena had intervened. The sandstone formations with their specific anatomy and composition acted as an accustomed amplifier and conduit, channeling the ultrasonic signal through the rock, acceptance it to be detected afar abroad. In the aperture, coolly bred Dr. Prowitt and his team had aboriginal recorded it. Board theorized that the women had affiliated their high-capacity solar power coffer originally advised for charging phones during their multi-day expedition to the damaged alarm in a desperate attack to accumulate it operational, enabling the anemic arresting to abide far best than the device's internal array would accept aloud. The alarm had been agreeable for help for 3 years, but the technology had bootless them in the best atrocious and abnormal way. The assay of the damaged alarm explained why no ache arresting was any time received. The women likely attempted to actuate it blind, that it was malfunctioning. They waited for help, dupe in a technology that had bootless them. With the antecedent of the arresting identified, the chase of the women continued. The atmosphere central of the abundance grew heavier. The affirmation the effected appropriate a atrocious attack for survival, but the absence of the women adumbrated a adverse end. The rescue team affiliated their search, effective accomplished the beacon, added into the more chancy abundance system. The tunnels became narrower, the air affection deteriorating, and afresh the cadaver dog accompanying the aggregation alerted intensely. The dog focused on a specific breath ahead. The team approached cautiously. They were met with an arena of adverse destruction. A massive centralized collapse had absolutely blocked the tunnel. Bags of boulders and bedrock had burst from the ceiling, creating an anesthetic barrier. The dog alerted again, absorption on the abject of the collapse. The aggregation began the assiduous process of analytical to bits field. their lights acid through the dust. And then they saw it, a beam of blush amidst the addle-gray rock. It was a distinctive hot blush bolt of a maiden's jacket. They had begun her. Imagigen's body was trapped below bags of boulders. The attributes of the collapse was non-apparent. Imagigen had been caught in the accessory collapse. The weight of the bedrock had ashamed her instantly. Based on the layers of dust and the accompaniment of the remains, the collapse had occurred connected ago. Acceptable anon, afterwards the women established their camp. The assay accepted the adverse fate of one of the women. The chase for Olia Caspary continued, but the assay of Imogen's anatomy casting a dark shadow over the operation. If Olesia had been at the affected aback the collapse occurred, she would accept been larboard alone in complete black with the anatomy of her best friend. The address from the Abundance Accomplishment team leader to the credible was delivered with able finality, but the implications were devastating. Imagine had been located, but accretion was impossible. The structural alternation of the mind, decidedly in the breadth of the collapse that entombed her body, was too severe. The appraisal assured that any attempt to burr the charcoal will be a life-threatening operation with an aeriform anticipation of triggering a catastrophic secondary collapse. The account hit Rowan with the force of a physical blow. Afterwards, 3 years of disturbing uncertainty. The acceptance of his daughter's afterlife was a brutal closure, but the disability to balance her anatomy to accompany her home and lay her to blow added a band of disturbing animality to the tragedy. Authorities made the difficult accommodation to accompany Rowan to the abundant site. They bawled him to accept the absoluteness of the situation, to see the betraying ambience for himself. He accustomed by a helicopter. The desolate landscape advanced below him. The mine, a blister on the earth, was now the centermost of a black operation. At the entrance of the mine, the accomplishment aggregation baton explained the bearings application diagrams and sensor abstracts to illustrate the alternation of the underground structure. He abundant the risk circuitous in any accretion attempt. It was a chat no ancestor should any time accept to endure. While the accretion of Imogen's anatomy was impossible, the accomplishment aggregation had managed to retrieve an acute allotment of evidence. Imagigen's haversack had been partially attainable abreast the bend of the collapse zone. They had anxiously extracted it during their antecedent assay and brought it to the surface. Central to the backpack, amidst the actual aliment and personal items, they began the blaster Rowan had insisted she carry. It was secured in its holster, absolutely loaded. It had not been fired. It accepted that she had not faced a blackmail from wildlife or added bodies afore the collapse. Her death was an adverse accident, an after-effect of the betraying environment. Rowan, continuing at the axis of the abundance that had claimed his daughter's life, was faced with an agonizing decision. The authorities proposed sealing the abundance assuredly to anticipate abutting tragedies and to defend the site. It meant accepting that Imagigen would abide underground, entombed in the darkness. With an abundant heart, Rowan agreed. It was the alone way to ensure that no one abroad would be endangered by the ambiguous mine. He requested that the mine be bankrupt completely, transforming it into Imagigen's final comatose place. A few canicule later, annihilation experts accustomed at the site. They strategically placed atomic accus at the entrance of the mine, artful to bang to account a controlled collapse that would allowance the aperture entirely. The detonation echoed to the canyons, a final clap punctuation to the tragedy. The access collapsed, sealing the abundance permanently. The dust settled, and the blackout returned. With the apperception bankrupt and Imagine's fate confirmed, the assay confused its focus absolutely to Alicia Caspary. The discovery of the makeshift affected accepted that Alicia had additionally burst into the abundance and survived the antecedent ordeal. The assay of the affected appropriate that both women were animate for several weeks underground. The analytical catechism now was what happened to Alicia. Board accepted that the collapse that dead Imagigen had occurred while both women were in the mine. If Alicia had been abroad in the added arrangement at the time, she ability except survived the collapse, alone to acquisition herself trapped alone in the darkness. The chase of the attainable genitalia of the abundance had begun no trace of Olia's body. This appropriate two possibilities. Either her anatomy was active in an aloof breadth of the mine, conceivably in the aforementioned collapse that killed Imagigen, or she had begun addition way out. The closing achievability seemed unlikely. The abundance was old and complex, but the capital access was the alone accepted exit. However, the board banned to abolish the possibility. If Alicia had able to mine, the aisle of the case would change dramatically. To analyze this possibility, board commissioned an aeriform LARSA of the area. LIDAR, light detection and ranging, is an alien assay adjustment that uses pulse laser blades to add measurement distances to the Earth. It can access frondescence and actualize abundant three-dimensional maps of the terrain, absolute attenuate appearance that might be absent by acceptable aeriform photography. The LIDAR assay mapped the underground anatomy of the mine, absolute the measurement of the added arrangement, and anecdotic potential anomalies. The assay of the abstracts appear article unexpected. On the opposite ancillary of the Acropolis from the Capitol entrance, the assay articular attenuated vertical shaft extending from the underground tunnels to the surface. This was acceptable in old blast shaft designed to broadcast air in the mine. It was too attenuated for a being to easily climb, but in an atrocious situation, it ability action a bay and escape route. Arena aggregation was accomplished to the breadth of the blast shaft. The top of the shaft was a small, inconspicuous aperture in the rock, partially blocked by brush. It would have been about absurd to spot without the complete coordinates provided by the LAR survey. The aggregation scrutinized the opening, attractive for any assurance of animal passage. The bedrock about the bend of the shaft was asperous and weathered. Then they saw it, caught on a aciculate appendage of bedrock, aloof. Central to the aperture of the shaft were minute traces of boat fibers. The fibers were anxiously calm and beatific for argumentative analysis. The aftereffects were stunning. The fibers were synthetic, constant with the actual acclimated and high-performance alfresco gear, and the color was a characteristic adhesive green. Desay accepted that the fibers akin to characteristic blooming hiking jacket Olea Caspary was cutting a back she disappeared. The assay was an archetype shift. Olesia Casper had able to mine. The timeline was reconstructed based on the evidence began at the affected and the estimated amount of atomization of Imogen's body. Board theorized that Olesia had managed to ascend the blast shaft ancient about November 2019. Acceptable apprentice by desperation, afterwards a collapse that dead Imagigen and the burning of their supplies. She had survived weeks underground, endured the agony of witnessing her best friend's death, and managed a seemingly absurd escape from the darkness. She had emerged to assimilate the credible alive. The abstruseness deepened. If Olea able the abundance in November 2019, why did she never ability civilization? The air was all-inclusive and harsh, but she was an accomplished hiker, resourceful, and determined. She should accept being able to cross to the abutting alley or settlement. The essay was no best about an adverse draft in an abandoned mine. It was about what happened to Olesia Caspary afterwards. She emerged from the darkness, alone and desperate, into the alone amplitude of the Utah desert. The acceptance of Alicia Caspary's escape reignited the investigation with a new faculty of urgency. The focus confused from the bankrupt abundance to the all-inclusive alone landscape surrounding it. A renewed chase was launched, beaming apparent from a blast shaft exit. Investigators tried to reconstruct Alicia's acceptable path. She would accept emerge to assimilate the surface, malnourished, dehydrated, and traumatized. Her accessory was depleted. An emergency SOS alarm was damaged and left abaft in the mine. She was alone in the average of boilerplate with winter approaching. The chase teams meticulously scanned the breath attractive for any assurance of her passage. But the trail was 3 years cold. The arid ambience with its adamant wind and occasional beam floods had connected her back asleep in the aisle or alone items. The chase yielded nothing. The investigation adjourned again. The abstruseness of Alicia's fate remained unsolved. Had she succumbed to the elements, her anatomy absent in the all-inclusive wilderness, or had article abroad happened? The breakthrough came several months afterwards in Aboriginal 2023 from an abrupt source. A Bureau of Acreage Management BLM architect was animating the breadth documenting illegal angry on attainable land. The alien regions of the Utah area were a patchwork of attainable and clandestine land, and disputes over boundaries and agricultural rights were common. The architect was archetype a contested fence band adjoining a large, alone ranch. This breath was far from any roads characterized by rolling hills and dispersed vegetation. The agronomical was accepted for its antisocial owner, who fiercely guarded his aloofness and property. While documenting a breadth of the fence line that encroached on attainable land, the architect noticed article unusual. A accumulation of old tires and agronomical bits was visible abreast the fence, partially active in a dry wash. It looked like an actionable auctioning site. The architect approached the bit's accumulation to certificate the violation. As he got closer, he noticed an aberrant odor, a faint aroma of atomization alloyed with the aroma of old elastic and dust. He began to about-face some of the debris, investigating the measurement of the dumping. He pulled back an old absurd annoyance and froze. Below the debris, partially active in the dry earth, was an animal skeleton. The architect immediately secured the arena and alerted the authorities. The alien breath appropriate a specialized argumentative aggregation to be dispatched. The charcoal were anxiously biconcave and transported to the medical examiner's office. The skeleton was incomplete, broadcast by scavengers, but the argumentative assay yielded a complete identification. Through dental anal and DNA analysis, the charcoal were accepted to be those of Alicia Caspary. The assay was devastating. Alicia, who had survived the horrors of the mine, had died in the attainable desert. Her anatomy alone, like bits below, an accumulation of old tires. The antecedent acceptance was that she had succumbed to the elements anon afterwards artificed the abundance, and her anatomy had been acted by the animate bank until the architect stumbled aloft it. But the dissection appeared an alarming twist. The forensic assay bent that Olia was acutely angular and dehydrated at the time of her death, constant with her affliction and the abundance and consecutive exposure. However, the examination additionally appeared affirmation of cogent agony that could not be explained by an adventitious death. The skeletal charcoal showed affirmation of edgeless force agony to the skull and ribs inflicted abreast the time of death. Furthermore, the argumentative anthropologist articular attenuate fractures and injuries constant with astringent accurate and sexual abuse. The case was anon reclassified as a homicide. Alicia Caspary had not died of exposure. She had been murdered. The ability sent shock aftereffects through the investigation. The anecdotal of adverse hiking draft had been shattered. Alicia had survived the abundance alone to appointment of predator in the alien desert. The assay now focused on identifying the killer. The breath of charcoal were begin abreast the bound of the alone agronomical, anon drew suspicion appear the owner. But board-bald accurate affirmation bond the agronomical to the crime. The remnants of Olia's clothing, including her characteristic blooming jacket, were begin at the site. They were base and weathered, but they captivated acute trace evidence. The argumentative aggregation anxiously analyzed the fibers, analytic for annihilation that ability analyzed the perpetrator or the breadth of the crime. The assay articular abnormal trace affirmation on the bits of her clothing. It was not the archetypal dust and bits accepted from the arid environment. Instead, the argumentative team found actinic residues of a specific industrial-grade agronomical disinfectant. This blazon of antibacterial was frequently acclimated in all-embracing livestock operations for charwoman stalls and equipment. It was not article Olia would accept encountered in the wilderness. Furthermore, the assay identified unique complete fibers anchored in the bolt of her jacket. These fibers were not constant with her own gear. They were specialized aeriform backbone fibers acclimated in the accomplishment of high-end horse tack saddles, harnesses, and ropes. The aggregate of the agricultural disinfectant and the specialized horse tack fibers acicular appear a specific environment, an animate ranch specializing in high-quality horses. The assay of this altered trace evidence was the key breakthrough. It linked Kedia's afterlife to a specific breadth and provided an absolute advance to the perpetrator. The assay, now angry its abounding absorption to the isolated agronomical adjoining the armpit breadth Olia's charcoal were found. The desert, which had captivated its secrets for so long, was assuredly alpha to acknowledge the accuracy about Olia Caspary's adverse fate. The altered signature of the trace evidence, the industrial-grade agronomical disinfectant, and the specialized complete fibers from high-end horse tack accustomed board to attenuated their focus significantly. These abstracts were not accepted in the sparsely busy region. The primary ambition was the ample alone ranch adjacent to Brett Alicia Caspery's charcoal were discovered. The agronomical was endemic by Sterling Bracken. Bracken, in his backward 50s, was an antisocial mount accepted locally as angrily territorial and adverse against outsiders. He lived alone on the sprawling acreage managing a baby but high-quality horse ancestry operation. Bracken had acceptability for being annoying and volatile. Accomplishments to say appear above-mentioned bent almanac for advance stemming from an agitated altercation over agriculture rights several years earlier. Bracken anon became the prime suspect. The breadth of the body, the trace affirmation analogous his ranching operation, and his accepted ability for violence created an acute, amplified case. Detectives accustomed at Bracken's agronomical to account him. The property was isolated. The capital abode anchored several far from the abutting road, attainable alone by an asperous dirt track. The atmosphere of the agronomical was oppressive. The blackout burst alone by the complete of the wind and the occasional whinny of a horse. Bracken met the detectives at the access to his property. He was defensive and annoying from the outset, ambitious to apperceive why they were there in abnegation to acquiesce some access to the Capitol House. The account was conducted in the attainable air abreast the access gate. The detectives gradually revealed the purpose of their visit, answered that they were investigating the dematerialization of Alicia Caspery. Bracken claimed to accept no ability of the missing woman. Afresh, the detectives confronted him with the essay of Alicia's charcoal abreast his fence line. Bracken's address shifted. He became visibly agitated, his defensiveness axis into affected evasion. He realized he bawled to accommodate an account for the attendance of the body. Afterwards, a connected pause. He accepted to encountering Alicia in backward 2019. Bracken's anecdotal was carefully constructed. He claimed he was blockage his fence band aback. He began oisia abnormality in the desert, aberrant and severely injured. He said she was almost alive, adversity from astringent malnutrition and exposure. He claimed he tried to advise her. He brought her back to his ranch, intending to booty her to the abutting boondocks for medical assistance. But he claimed she succumbed to her injuries anon afterwards arrival. Bracken declared that he panicked. He knew about the missing hikers, and he feared that his bent almanac would advance authorities to accusation him for her death. He fabricated the acute accommodation to adumbrate the body, concealing it below the accumulation of tires and bits of breast defense line, hoping it would never be found. Bracken's adventure was believable on the surface. It explained how Olia's body ended up on his acreage and accustomed his role in concealing her death. But the detectives were skeptical. Bracken's address was too controlled, his anecdotal too convenient, and his adventure did not explain the affirmation of edgeless force agony and animal corruption began on Alicia's remains. The detectives apprenticed him on the capacity of her injuries. Bracken became ambiguous again, claiming he didn't remember the specifics, that she was already acutely afflicted aback he began her. The detectives knew they needed more affirmation to breach through Bracken's anxiously complete facade. They anchored a chase accreditation for his property based on the trace affirmation and the adjacency of the body. The chase of the agronomical was extensive. The property was ample with assorted outbuildings, barns, and accumulator sheds. The board focused on the areas where Bracken ability except captivated Oja captive. They zeroed in on a remote, bald bunkhouse anchored far from the capital abode abreast the horse stables. The applesauce abode appeared battered and alone from the outside, but as the investigators entered, they were hit by a cutting odor. It was the aroma of the agronomical disinfectant. The same actinic balance began on Alicia's clothing. The odor was strong, suggesting a contempo advancing cleaning attempt. The applesauce abode had been bald bare, the appliance removed, the floors adjourned clean, but the pervasive aroma of the antibacterial adumbrated. That article had happened here, article Bracken Capital to conceal. The board anxiously candied the arena application's specialized techniques to ascertain abeyant evidence. They acclimated luminol to chase for claret stains, but the advancing charwoman had removed any trace. The advance came during an abundant chase of the anatomy itself. One of the board noticed a part floorboard abreast the back bank of the applesauce house. He anxiously aerialed the board. Below the floorboard, hidden in the aphotic cavity, they begin them. Restraints. They were not standard handcuffs or ropes. They were ancient from the aforementioned specialized horse tack actual begin on Elysia's remains. The unique, complete fibers akin perfectly. The essay of the restraints shattered Bracken's narrative. They were bright affirmation of bondage and abuse. Alicia had not died artlessly anon afterwards accession at the ranch. She had been captivated captive, restrained, and abused. The affirmation appropriate, alarming arrangement of events. Alicia, desperate and accessible afterwards artifice to mine, had encountered Sterling Bracken. But instead of allowance her, Bracken saw her agony as an opportunity. He had abducted her, taken her to the alien applesauce house, and subjected her to abiding abuse. The edgeless force agony adumbrated that she had fought back or that Bracken had become violent. The exact circumstances of her afterlife remained unclear, but the affirmation asserted appropriate that Bracken had murdered her, either intentionally or as an after-effect of the abuse. The essay of the restraints combined with the trace affirmation and the dissection allegation provided the absolute affidavit bald allegation Sterling Bracken with the kidnapping, animal abuse, and annihilation of Alicia Caspary. The charlatan who had preyed on the accessible and relied on the abreast of the arid to burrow his crimes had assuredly been brought to justice. The balloon of Sterling Bracken began in mid-2023, about 4 years afterwards Alicia Caspary's disappearance. The case had captured the absorption of the bounded media, the alarming capacity of the dual tragedy arresting and alarming the public. The attorneys was tense. Rowan Vez sat in the advance row, his face categorical with grief. April, both his babe Imagigen and her best acquaintance Oligia. Sterling Bracken remained aloof throughout the proceedings. He maintained his abnegation to confess, sticking to his aboriginal anecdotal that Oligia had died of accustomed causes, and he had artlessly afraid and acted the body. The case presented an accurate and cutting case, weaving calm the amplified evidence, the argumentative findings, and the timeline of events. They corrected an adverse account of the two women's ordeal. They declared the antecedent accident, the abatement into the abandoned mine, the atrocious attack for adaptation in the darkness. They abundant the essay of the makeshift camp and the damaged SOS beacon, the cyberbanking scream that had gone exceptional for 3 years. They anecdotal the tragic death of Imagigenes, ashamed in the cave-in, her anatomy always entombed in the bankrupt mine. Afresh, the prosecution focused on Alicia Caspary's arresting escape, the ascent up the blast shaft, the actualization assimilate the surface, alive but vulnerable. They emphasized the alarming aberration of fate. Alicia, having survived the impossible, alone to appointment Sterling Bracken. The case argued that Bracken saw Alicia's atrocious accompaniment not as a cry for advice, but as an opportunity. He had abducted her, taken her to the alien applesauce abode on his ranch, and subjected her to doubtful abuse. The key evidence was the altered trace affirmation begin on Elysia's remains. The agronomical antibacterial and the specialized horse tack fibers affiliated her anon to Bracken's ranch. The case presented able testimony explaining the aberration of these abstracts and the acceptation of their attendance on her clothing. The acme of the balloon was the presentation of the restraints begin hidden below the floorboard in the bunkhouse. The case displayed the restraints to the jury. The specialized horse tack actual analogous to fibers begin on Olia's remains. This accurate affirmation anon contradicted Bracken's anecdotal and asserted appropriate bondage and abuse. The aegis attempted to actualize reasonable doubt, arguing that the affirmation was amplified and that there was no absolute affidavit that Bracken had murdered Olia. They emphasized the abridgment of DNA evidence linking Bracken to the crime, advertence to the abasement of the charcoal, and the advancing charwoman of the applesauce house. But the accumulation of the affirmation was too compelling. The aggregate of the breadth of the body, the trace evidence, the dissection allegation advertence animal corruption, and edgeless force trauma, and the essay of the restraints created an anecdotal that was absurd to ignore. After several canicule of deliberation, the board accomplished a verdict. Sterling Bracken was begin accusable on all counts: kidnapping, animal abuse, and abomination murder. He was bedeviled to life imprisonment, afterwards the achievability of parole. The case bankrupt on the bifold tragedy bald headed by the aberrant sound of a damaged SOS beacon. The adventitious essay by the acoustic researchers had set in motion an alternation of contests that appear the alarming accuracy about the dematerialization of imagogenes and olea casperi. Imagogen Velis charcoal entombed Oral the bankrupt Utah mine, her final resting place apparent alone by the all-inclusive bashful amplitude of the desert, a accommodation fabricated by her ancestor Rowan to assure others from the aforementioned fate. Olesia Casperi survived the antecedent ordeal, arising from the black with angry will to live, alone to accommodate an alarming end at the easily of an adept predator in a remote, unforgiving wilderness.